My name is Eleanor Grace Whitmore. I'm 68 years old. For nearly 5 decades, I was a wife, a mother, and the soul of Hazelbrook Orchards, a small, organic apple farm tucked in the gentle hills of Pennsylvania. These hands of mine, now stiff with arthritis, still remember how to knead sourdough and how to trim branches before the sun even peeked over the ridge. Richard and I built this life together. 3 weeks ago, I buried him. We'd been married since 1981, built every part of this farm, this house, this family side by side. But the morning after his funeral, as the sun streamed through our kitchen window like it always had, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not grief, not loss, but betrayal. The sense that maybe everything we built hadn't rooted as deeply as I thought. Or maybe the roots had rotted while I wasn't looking. Richard died of pancreatic cancer, 14 brutal months. I watched a man who could once lift barrels and dig trenches weaken day by day. His fire slowly stolen from him. He didn't want the kids to know. Let them live in the light a little longer. He whispered to me one night. Drugged on morphine, barely able to keep his eyes open, I nodded, held his hand, and agreed, because that's what love does. But honestly, they hadn't been around anyway. Darren, our eldest, had been lost to Boston years ago. High finance, high-rise lifestyle. He visited maybe once a year, and even then, it was mostly handshakes and business calls from the porch. Samantha, well, she was always chasing some new wellness dream. Juice cleanses, yoga retreats, guided goat therapy, you name it. And when the dreams fell through, she always came knocking for another check. Richard never said no. So yeah, I thought maybe grief would bring them home. Maybe losing their father would remind them what Hazelbrook meant. That this place, this life was built from love, sweat, and a little dirt under the nails. I thought wrong. At the funeral, I didn't see mourners. I saw calculators. I saw inventory takers. The night after we laid Richard to rest, I sat in the kitchen alone, staring at the old wood table where we once played board games and sorted bills. I told the kids we could go through some of Richard's things together in the morning. I meant it as a gesture, something small, something sacred. But they had other plans. Morning came, and the sunlight filtered through the lace curtains Richard and I had chosen 30 years ago. I brewed his favorite coffee, simple, strong, unpretentious. Darren came downstairs in a sharp navy blazer, didn't even loosen the tie. Samantha followed, looking ready for a photo shoot. Silk blouse, perfect hair, all angles and polish. Mom, Darren said, placing his designer mug on the table. We've been talking. Samantha nodded like she was closing a deal. We think it's time to settle things. The estate, the business, the house. I blinked, settling, as if our life together was just a line item on a spreadsheet. Darren kept going. You can't manage the orchard alone. It's too much, especially at your age. My age, as if years were a weakness, not the reason this place even exists. Samantha chimed in, her voice soft and slick. There's a retirement community, Sunnyvale Estates. It's beautiful. You'd love it. Activities, friends, support. I stood up to clear the breakfast plates, mostly so they wouldn't see my hands shaking. Then Darren pulled out a folder. He slid it across the table like a closing offer. Dad talked to me last year. He wanted Melissa and me to take over. I looked down. The paperwork was printed on Darren's company letterhead. Richard's signature stared back at me too neat, too smooth. Richard hadn't written that cleanly in months. This isn't from our lawyer, I said quietly. He was lucid. Darren insisted. He meant it. There's a developer, Samantha added quickly. They offered $7 million. The land's worth it. We'd be set. You'd be cared for. A developer. They wanted to sell the orchard, pave over decades of soil, sunlight, and memory for a cul-de-sac. You're talking about selling your father's life's work, I said. Mom, be reasonable, Darren replied. The orchard can't last forever. And something inside me snapped. Not loud, not angry, just a quiet burn like embers catching wind. I had stood in this kitchen with frost in my hair and firewood on my back. I had pruned trees in storms, baked pies for fundraisers, driven tractors when no one else showed up. They thought I was fragile. I looked my son straight in the eye. Show me the will. He hesitated, then slid the paper forward again. I didn't touch it. I'm going to bed, I said. We'll talk tomorrow. But I already knew there would be no tomorrow conversation, because this wasn't grief. It was a hostile takeover. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay there in the quiet, in the bed Richard and I had shared for nearly 40 years, listening to the wind tap the windows and the branches sway just outside. I knew every creak of this house, but the silence in my children, that felt unfamiliar, cold. By morning, the smell of coffee floated up the stairs, but not the kind Richard loved. It was imported, sharp, Darren's kind of coffee. When I came down, they were dressed and packed. The suitcase by the door wasn't mine. We packed a few things, Samantha said, like this was some kind of gift. We thought we could show you Sunnyvale today. Just a tour. I'm not going to a retirement community, I said, reaching for the mug. Darren glanced at his watch. Mom, be reasonable. The paperwork is done. The developer deal closes next week. You can't stay here. I looked at him, still calm. I've lived here my whole adult life. This is my home. It's all of ours, he said flatly. Dad left the business to us. It's time you let go. I studied him for the first time. I saw him not as the little boy who once asked Richard about bees and blossoms, but as a stranger, a man who now saw me as a roadblock. I need my medication, I said, stepping away, and I'd like to grab a few family photos. Samantha smiled, relieved. Take whatever you want. We'll ship the rest. They had no idea what I was really grabbing. Upstairs, I didn't cry. Instead, I moved with the slow, deliberate focus of a woman who's done hiding. I collected my medication, but also retrieved something far more potent than pills. Behind a panel in the old bathroom medicine cabinet, one Richard had installed himself back in the 80s. I reached in and pulled out a thin envelope sealed in plastic. My passport, my birth certificate, both in my maiden name. Then I crossed into our bedroom and opened the closet. Behind Richard's old flannel shirts, where he used to hang them by habit even when they were threadbare, I reached for a small, fireproof lockbox. It was heavier than I remembered. Inside, the original deed to 20 acres of land we'd quietly purchased before our wedding, in my name alone. It had water rights, prime positioning, and sat right in the center of the orchard's irrigation system. Richard used to call it our break glass in case of emergency plot. And this was that emergency. When I came downstairs, the suitcase waited by the door like an accusation. Ready? Darren asked, without even glancing at me. I nodded. Sure. Samantha took my arm gently. She thought we were on the same team. Thought I'd given up. We drove through town, past the elementary school where I used to volunteer for story hour, past the library where I'd organized bake sales and gardening workshops. The sun warmed the fields, already blooming. Every row of trees stood proud, reaching up like they knew who truly planted them. But then Darren veered off the highway, a sharp turn onto a remote county road. 20 minutes later, we were parked on a gravel shoulder beside a barren field. This is where you get off, Mom, Darren said, like he was pointing out a scenic lookout. Samantha blinked, confused. Darren, what? She'll contest the will. She'll make a scene. This is simpler. He got out and opened my door like some gentleman in a twisted movie. She's got clothes, mids, a phone. There's a gas station 5 miles up, and just like that, they drove away, left me standing in the dirt, wind tugging at my coat, suitcase in hand. It was surreal, but I wasn't scared. I wasn't broken. I was free. I started walking not toward the gas station, but back toward town. My shoes weren't built for gravel roads. My back ached, but my heart, it was steadier than it had been in years, because tucked inside my purse was everything I needed: ID, medication, and that deed, 20 acres of leverage they didn't even know existed. 2 hours later, I limped into the parking lot of Miller's Gas and Grocery. Still the same chipped red door, the same wooden bench out front where Richard and I once shared ice cream on hot days. I sat down, suitcase at my feet, and watched the locals go about their day. Ray Miller stepped outside, wiping his hands on his apron. Mrs. Whitmore, his brow wrinkled. "You okay? You look pale." "Just resting." "Ray, been a long morning." He nodded slowly, eyes flicking to the suitcase. "Really sorry about Richard. He was a good man." "Yes," I said softly. "Yes, he hesitated. Need to use the phone." I nodded. He led me inside to a small back office. Dusty, cozy, smelled like old receipts and cinnamon gum. I dialed the number from memory. Harold Jennings. Came the voice on the other end, our family lawyer for over 30 years. "Harold," I said, "it's Naomi." He went silent for a beat. "Naomi, I've been trying to reach you. I expected you at the will reading." I gripped the receiver tighter. "What reading?" Another pause. Longer. Darren presented a will. I had questions. It didn't match the last version Richard and I reviewed together. "I need your help," I said, "and your discretion." "You have both," he replied without hesitation. "Meet me at the office. 1 hour." I hung up and turned to Ray. "You still sell prepaid phones?" He nodded. "You want one?" "Yes, and water." He handed me both and refused to take my money. "Anything you need, Mrs. Whitmore. Just say the word." That kindness, it nearly broke me. But I didn't cry when I buried Richard. I wouldn't cry now. There was still work to do. Harold's office sat above the old insurance agency on Main Street, across from the Hazelbrook Library. He was the kind of man who wore bow ties unironically and still trusted people's word more than their paperwork. His secretary, Helen, gasped when she saw me. "Mrs. Whitmore, oh my, are you all right? Would you like a glass of water?" "I'm fine," I said. Harold appeared, ushering me not to his desk, but to 2 leather chairs by the window. "Naomi," he said gently, "tell me everything." So I did, from the morning Darren brought out the fake documents, to the car ride into nowhere, to standing alone on the side of a dirt road. I told him everything. When I finished, I reached into my purse and handed him the deed. He stared at it for a long moment, then looked up with a slow, amazed shake of his head. This is gold. I know. This isn't just land with the water rights attached. It's the artery. They can't sell. They can't even grow." He sat up straighter. "The will Darren presented, it's not valid. I suspected a forgery. The signature was just too clean, too sharp for someone on hospice care. But this deed gives us real ground to stand on. I want to stop the sale." I said, "I want my home back, and I want them to understand what they've done. Then we'll make sure they do." He got to work immediately, drafted a letter to the developer, flagged the irregularities, highlighted the water rights, and prepped a motion to file in district court to freeze the transaction. "If they're smart," he said, "they'll back out on their own. Developers don't like lawsuits, especially when land rights are in question." Outside the window, the world kept moving. A couple walked by holding iced coffee. A dog barked in the distance. Life didn't know it. But something was shifting. I looked Harold straight in the eye. I don't want revenge, I said. I want truth and peace. You'll get both. He promised, starting now. By noon the next day, Harold had filed the emergency injunction to freeze the sale of Hazelbrook Orchards. A courier delivered the legal notice straight to the development firm Darren and Samantha had partnered with. By evening, the entire deal was in limbo. The developer hadn't just been kept in the dark about the water rights. They'd been outright misled. Without those rights, the property lost most of its value, not to mention its capacity to function as a working orchard. The buyer's lawyers were scrambling, contacting Harold for urgent clarification. Harold didn't sugarcoat it. I told them the land is incomplete, he said, flipping through his notes as I sat across from him in his office. The water rights are owned separately, and your children misrepresented their authority. If the developer has any sense, they'll walk away before they find themselves tied up in a lawsuit they can't win. That night, my prepaid phone buzzed. A text from Samantha. Mom, please, call me. Darren's freaking out. We didn't know about the other land. Can we just fix this? No apology, no remorse, just panic. I didn't reply. Later, Harold got a call from Darren himself. He was aggressive, defensive, trying to take control, but Harold didn't flinch. All communication goes through legal now, he said calmly, then hung up without fanfare. They're starting to realize, Harold said to me, just how badly they miscalculated. They thought I had nothing left. I said, but you had everything they forgot to value. He gave a quiet nod. You're handling this with grace. Eleanor, a lot of people would have gone scorched earth. I looked out his office window. I've lived with too much love in my bones to turn bitter. But that doesn't mean I'll be silent. Outside, Hazelbrook moved at its usual pace. A little boy raced his bike down Main Street, chased by a golden retriever. Across the street, someone painted a fence while humming to themselves. Life was still kind here, still decent. I intended to keep it that way. I didn't return to the farmhouse not right away. Instead, I rented a modest apartment above the town bakery. It was small, cozy, and smelled like cinnamon and fresh bread every morning. There was a little balcony just big enough for a rocking chair and a pot of mint. I tended to every morning with quiet devotion. I started teaching again. Quilting classes at the community center on Wednesdays. Organic gardening workshops at the library on weekends. Teenagers came, so did retirees. Even a few young couples hoping to start their own small farms. I didn't preach. I just shared what I knew, passed down through decades of soil and time. People listened. Because I wasn't just a voice, I was a witness to what it meant to build something and protect it. Eventually, I donated the water rights to the Hazelbrook Agricultural Cooperative. Not for profit, not for leverage. For the future, they couldn't be sold, only used by those who truly wanted to farm. The cooperative's board, mostly young, bright-eyed growers, welcomed the gift with open arms. They promised to care for those trees the way Richard had. That was enough for me. As for Darren and Samantha, they stayed quiet. I heard through the grapevine that the developer had pulled out completely, that the forged will was under investigation, that their reputations took a hit in their respective cities. They weren't shunned, but people were asking questions, the kind of questions that sting. But I didn't gloat. I didn't seek revenge. Truth is its own kind of justice. It doesn't need a loudspeaker. The orchard remained. Every time I walked by it, rows upon rows of blooming apple trees greeted me with the same grace they always had. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. I used to see it as something Richard and I created for our children. Now I saw it for what it truly was, a legacy that belonged to the land, not to entitlement. That day they left me on the side of the road. They thought they'd broken me, but they didn't understand who I was before the apron, before the orchard, before I became mom. I was Eleanor Grace, a woman with her name still on the deed, a woman who'd walked through storms and sunrises, a woman who had built something not just for her family, but for her community. And I had never needed to scream to be strong. That's the part they never understood. The silence they mistook for weakness had always been my power, the patience, the grit, the quiet refusal to let go of what mattered most. And if you're watching this, if you've ever been left behind, dismissed, told you were too old, too soft, too done, I want you to hear me. You are never too old to fight for what is yours. Your value doesn't fade with age, and your silence, it doesn't mean surrender. You don't have to raise your voice to raise hell. You just have to know who you are and stand there, rooted like a tree in full bloom, refusing to be moved. My orchard still stands, and so do I. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever been underestimated, or pushed aside, or left behind, drop a comment below. Tell your story, because your story matters. And maybe, just maybe, telling it will give someone else the courage to rise up and reclaim what was always theirs. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and share if you believe in quiet strength and legacies that endure.